Hi, and welcome to the Candice Malcolm Show. I'm your host, Candice Malcolm. We have a great show lined up for you today. We're going to talk about the latest in the tariff threats and the tariff war that look like they could be coming as soon as this Saturday. We'll talk about the government's response, which is basically creating a COVID-like schedule to pay Canadians just like they did during CERB. It's unbelievable. NDP Leader Jagmeet Singh suggesting that perhaps he will prop up the Liberal government once again after promising us that he won't. We'll get to his latest comments. We'll talk about Mark Carney and the leadership. And later on, we're going to talk about a First Nations documentary that does a major disservice to Canadians in spreading mistruths. We'll try to correct the record on that. I am pleased and delighted today to be joined by Tom Flanagan. Tom Flanagan is Professor Emeritus at the University of Calgary School of Public Policy. He served as a campaign manager on Stephen Harper's Canadian Alliance leadership campaign and Harper's Conservative Party leadership. It's always a pleasure to have Tom on the show. So, Tom, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, Malcolm. It's great. Candice, great to be here.
Great, thanks. So before we get into the rest of the news, I want to talk about a exclusive that True North has published today, an exclusive poll that we commissioned that found that nearly half of young Canadian men would take American citizenship from Donald Trump if offered. So the poll was conducted by One Persuasion. 45% of young men aged 18 to 34 would take American citizenship. And 46% would reject it. So just right about half. Next, we saw that the willingness sharply decreased as men got older. So only 15% of men 55 and older said that they would. Women were generally less interested in taking U.S. citizenship. Only 25% of young women age 18 to 34 said yes. Dropped to 18 for women 35 to 55, and then only 7% 55 and older. It kind of makes sense. As you get more established, you're less likely to take a risk and move to another country. One thing that I thought was really interesting was that the education level mattered. It was a strong factor influencing whether they would be willing to take this offer. So only 13% of respondents with a high school education or less said that they would take U.S. citizenship, but it rose steadily with education levels. So 19% of community college or trade educated said that they would take the offer, 25% with a bachelor's degree, and up to 35% for those with a postgraduate degree. So kind of interesting that the more educated that you get, the more likely you would be. I think that makes sense because personally, like I know a lot of people who are doctors or who have postgraduate degrees in medicine, and a lot of them go to the U.S. just so that they can make some money. That there's more opportunities down there. Same thing for law. Same thing probably for universities. There's so many more universities down there. So if you have a PhD, you might be more likely to be able to get a job down there. Tom, I want to get your thoughts on this. You worked in a university. What do you think about the fact that the more education you have, the more likely you would be to want to join and become an American?
Well, I think it makes sense. It's a country is 9 times as big, at least the United States, and there are more opportunities down there. And many of these jobs are more highly paid in the United States, um, and high income people are more highly taxed in Canada. So there are a lot of economic reasons why somebody might consider. I would just add one footnote as somebody who actually has American citizenship because I was born and grew up there. If these people realize that if they obtained American citizenship, or even if they went to the United States and worked there on a green card, they would have to file with the Internal Revenue Service for the rest of their life, even if they came back to Canada later. So there are some downsides that perhaps not everybody realizes. But I
Yeah, that's right.
see why it looks attractive.
Yeah, my stepmother, who's lived in Canada for 40 years, but she grew up in Boston. She's American. It drives her crazy having to file her taxes every year to the point where she's even considered renouncing, but then that's so much paperwork and money that she said, forget it. I was talking to a journalist friend because one of the things that was interesting was that the number on the prairies isn't very high. According to this study, it was 18% of people on the prairies that said they would take American citizenship, whereas I think BC was the highest with 25%. I was talking to a journalist friend from Ontario, and he was really surprised by that. He was like, I would have imagined that Albertans would be the number one and not British Columbians. But it makes sense to me. I've been talking to a lot of Albertans who, they mistrust Ottawa and the federal government in Canada, but they would mistrust a bigger government in Washington, D.C. with a lot more power, even more. What's your take on that?
Well, I think it's mainly economic. That Alberta at the present time has more opportunities um, than any other province, and that's demonstrated by the number of people who are moving here right now. So I think young men are probably less dissatisfied with their situation than they might be in some other provinces. So I can understand that. Now that could change with the change in the international oil market, and a lot of things could happen to take away Alberta's prosperity. But right now, it's pretty good, and people are moving in rather than trying to leave.
Well, yeah, that's great. I mean, I grew up in British Columbia in the 90s and the 2000s, and I would say that like a large proportion of my graduating class in high school moved to Alberta for the opportunities that the oil field had in the kind of early 2000s. A lot of them moved up to Fort McMurray or Edmonton just to have jobs that didn't exist in British Columbia anymore. I want to step back a little, Tom, and ask you about your broader thoughts. I mean, you've probably been watching Donald Trump, as we all have, and his sort of, I think he's musing in his jokes about Canada becoming the 51st state, sort of mocking Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, calling him Governor Trudeau. I think that is really, Trump has a knack for making jokes in a way that really hits someone where it hurts. I think that's humiliating to Justin Trudeau to be called the governor, and Trump knows that. What do you make of Trump's actions, his words, the whole 51st state joke, and the tariffs that may be coming as soon as this weekend?
Well, on the jokes, the 51st state, I think these are part of Trump's negotiating style and the way he deals with rivals. And we've seen many examples of this. And then he often reconciles with these people afterwards. So I don't think joining the United States is a serious idea for anybody, really. And so I'm not spending any time thinking about that. The tariffs, on the other hand, are a very serious issue. And here the problem is for us to understand what Trump's motive is. Because he's, as he often does, he has said different things at different times. Um, so at times he is made it sound as if the tariffs, excuse me, are a negotiating tactic to get Canada to change certain policies like border control or contributing to NATO and um, building up armed forces and so forth. So some Canadians have said, well, that's the response we need to make is to satisfy Trump on these issues, which really aren't so terribly burdensome for Canada anyway. On the other hand, there's a lot of evidence that Trump wants to levy tariffs for revenue. He has economic advisors who have apparently convinced him that you can get rid of the federal income tax and replace that revenue with tariff revenue. Now, personally, I doubt that that's true, but excuse me, my voice is not what it used to be. If that's what's really in his mind, then the tariffs will come no matter what Canada does, because the point is to raise revenue in the United States. I don't know what's in his mind. I guess we just have to wait and see. But it's important to find out because our responses would be quite different depending on what the real motivation is. And then there's this issue of the unfavorable balance of trade, and that I think is based on a misunderstanding on Trump's part. But again, if that's what's in his mind, he might be levying tariffs for that reason too. And there's not a whole lot that Canada can do about that. Ross McKittrick has explained to the public in some columns why there's this unfavorable balance of trade and how it's related to the United States need to borrow. So these international accounts balance in the end, but whether it's in financial transfers or transfers of goods, it can change a whole lot. So anyway, I'm not sure what the right response is. I think we have to wait and see what Trump's real motivation is, and maybe that will become clear or not. I don't know.
Yeah, well, Danielle Smith has made a similar point. She basically said if you take out our oil, which we sell at a discount to the United States anyway, in part because we don't have another customer, that it's actually Canada that has a trade deficit. And that might be based on misunderstanding. You said that you don't think that Trump's offer is serious and that you shouldn't spend a lot of time thinking about it. I think that's right, but I think it's a good time to have this sort of thought experiment. And I saw Jordan Peterson had a piece on the cover of the National Post this morning. The cover says, "What a poor friend we've been." And the online version says, "What Canada must offer more than Trump could." Now, this article is getting a lot of traction online. A lot of people on the political left are very upset that Peterson would write this and that the National Post would publish this. It's a long piece, it's an essay, but I encourage listeners to go check it out because it's really interesting. Peterson basically says that there's this prominent anti-Americanism that's prevalent, particularly in central Canada. He gives an anecdote of when he worked at Harvard and then he moved to teach in Canada at the University of Toronto. He brought with him some of the brightest sort of graduate students that he had, brought them to Canada, and he was constantly embarrassed by the anti-Americanism that they would encounter at the university and how prevalent it is. And there's this sort of pernicious attitude. I don't think that attitude exists in the same way in Western Canada. I haven't seen it as much. That's part of the reason I loved being in Alberta is that the knee-jerk anti-Americanism wasn't there. It certainly is there in Toronto. So Peterson describes that. And he basically runs through the case as to how Alberta has been severely mistreated by Canada over basically since Pierre Trudeau was prime minister. I don't think that you'd get a lot of arguments from people in Alberta about that, about just how unfair the Federation has been to Alberta in many ways. He concludes by basically just saying that Trump could offer Alberta a better deal, but we don't want that. Instead, it should be on the onus should be on Canada to say, look, we need to up our game. We need to start treating Alberta as a fair partner in Confederation, and we need to take ourselves more seriously. I'll read just the last paragraph here because I think it's quite powerful. Peterson says, Trump is threatening the integrity of Canada and very effectively. The fact of that threat and its effectiveness might make us think twice. In such thinking, there could be an opportunity to shed the idiocy that is making us poor, weak, and irrelevant on the national stage and contemptible to our neighbors. We could make this saber rattling into an opportunity, increase our cross-border trade, get out of our own way on the energy front, rekindle national pride, at least to the point where we regard our country as both viable and valuable, seek the international markets that would make us truly independent, strengthen our commitment to the military, that would make us increasingly and truly necessary if such independence were pursued, and make of the next 100 years Canada's triumph instead of the story of contemptible, self-aggrandizing, moralistic, falsely green, and socialist demise. Now, that's quite harsh and well written, but quite harsh. I actually think Jordan Peterson is right on the money here. I think we should take this as an opportunity to reflect, look at our country, which is failing because of the socialistic policies, the woke socialism brought on by Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, and take this as an opportunity to really turn our country around. I mean, we may not even have the choice. We have to do that from an economic perspective, probably from a military perspective, if Canada wants to truly survive as a nation. What do you make of all this, Tom?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would agree in broad outline with what he's saying. As far as the anti-Americanism goes, yeah, it's not a big deal in Alberta. I have experienced it a couple of times in my own life, but these were just twits that I didn't take too seriously. It is more common in the East. People aren't even really aware of it. In Ontario, it's just I think in Eastern Canada, it's very deeply rooted. Probably goes back to the American Revolution and foundation of Canada by the Loyalists, who were exiles from the United States. Well, they're not fully responsible for the foundation of Canada, but it's a very large element in it. So it's a long tradition there, and yeah, it comes with the territory, so to speak. As most Americans are not aware of it, though. You don't become aware of it unless you spend some time in Ontario. I mean, if you're just a tourist and you go to Toronto and you say, "Hey, nice," or at least you used to say, "Nice, clean city," and so on. Now, on the treatment of Alberta, yes, I think that that's true. Of course, I did a whole book about it recently, together with Jack Mintz and Ted Morton. Our major industries have been treated very badly by Canada. But you have to distinguish on this kind of issue, both with Alberta and with attitudes towards the United States. It's quite different under a Liberal government and a Conservative government. Under Mulroney and under Harper, Canada acted in a very friendly way towards the United States, cultivated good personal relations with presidents, supported American policies, at least talked about a greater military contribution. Not sure it was real, but they talked about it. So it's the Liberals, going back to Pierre Trudeau. He was the first one to sort of openly talk about distancing Canada from the United States. It actually didn't amount to anything. He wasn't able to do it, but he talked about it. It probably created some antagonism there. And with Chrétien and now with Trudeau Jr., there's been a pattern of not supporting the U.S. at key times, or making slighting comments, which you did not see under Conservative governments. Now, just a historical footnote here. This is ancient history, maybe, for many of our watchers, but this reverses a older historical pattern. Up until Trudeau, it was Conservatives who were perhaps more negative about the United States, and Liberals who historically were more favorable. I mean, a good example would be Diefenbaker refusing to take the nuclear missiles, and Peterson doing it. So Trudeau flipped the script. And since then, it's been the Liberals who've been more antagonistic towards the United States. If we get a Conservative government, that pattern will change, I think.
Well, I hope so, because, I mean, not that I agree with everything Trump says, but I think he raises some good points when it comes to Canada's lack of commitment to securing our border, the issue with fentanyl, the issue with people on terrorist watch lists, known terrorists sneaking into the United States from Canada. Why were they letting into Canada in the first place? I think that the focus needs to be, Tom, on fixing these problems and pulling our own weight militarily, rather than the approach that the Trudeau government is taking. So we'll talk about this now. First of all, we have Trump's new press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, confirming that the U.S. does still plan to implement tariffs on Canada on February 1st. Here she was yesterday, making it crystal clear.
Can you give us an update on the president's plans for his tariff agenda? He spoke a lot about this yesterday, and there's a couple of dates coming up that he's spoken to. Number one, February 1st, he's alluded to both the potential for tariffs for Canada and Mexico, but also China to take effect on those days. What's he thinking about that? Yeah. Should those countries expect that?
Again, he was asked and answered this question this past weekend when he took a lot of questions from the press, and he said that the February 1st date for Canada and Mexico still holds.
So February 1st still holds. And in response, we saw this story on Tuesday in the Globe and Mail. We covered this a little bit on our podcast yesterday, but we'll talk about it again. According to the Globe and Mail, Ottawa is planning pandemic-level relief for workers and businesses if Trump imposes his tariffs, sources say. So the federal government is planning a multi-billion-dollar pandemic-style bailout for workers and businesses if U.S. President Donald Trump follows through on this threat to impose a 25% tariff on Canada as early as this weekend. This is shocking to me, Tom, because it's like these Liberals don't learn anything, right? Rather than taking a look at the issues that Trump is highlighting very clearly, they go right to this knee-jerk reaction, like we'll have a national program, we'll just print more money, borrow more money, exactly what they did during the pandemic. They even had the Globe and Mail use that pandemic level relief. Like, that's not just a conservative talking point. That's what they're saying, that they want to bring back CERB. They want to start paying people to stay at home if they're economically impacted. Canada's broke. We don't have the money. I mean, we'll show this graph. For 8 years, every Canadian now owes $29,253. This is a post from Pierre Poilievre. Just look at the debt. Look at our national debt. Look at how it's gone up since Justin Trudeau was elected. It basically doubled during COVID and continues to flail out of control, spiraling. And because of it, we have an absolute crisis of inflation, cost of living, because the government has borrowed so much, printed so much money, and flooded the money supply. So it's baffling to me that they would go with this approach. Not surprising. I think that, rather than try to fix our national security or immigration and make a deal with Trump, Trudeau will always go back to some grandiose government plan. What did you make of this report, and what do you think about this reaction here?
Well, a few points. Number one, these clowns don't need much incentive to spend a lot of money. It's kind of a natural response for them. Secondly, it could only be a short-term response. We can't possibly afford to do this for years. Yes, if you were trying to get over a difficult period of a few months, maybe you could consider something like that, but it can't possibly work in the long run. And third, it may well just be an election thing. The Liberals, like at the moment, they have nothing to run on. They're defending a record, which is a record of failure to a large degree. They're trying to repudiate parts of it, like the capital gains tax and the increase in the capital gains tax and the carbon tax. But this would give them something positive to run on. We're defending Canada. We're going to help you. So it appeals to some of the baser instincts of the electorate. It's almost jingoistic. This is the way we defend Canada, and and it appeals to the widespread desire to get something for nothing. Government handing out money, isn't that great? I got a check from the government the other day. I'm not quite sure why. I think maybe it was a carbon tax rebate, but I said, what a great guy, Justin Trudeau. He's always sending me money. So maybe I'm cynical as a political scientist, ex-campaign manager, but I would see this as primarily an election ploy. Gives them something positive to run on.
Yeah, perhaps you're right. What a sad state of affairs, though, that Canadians, that the Liberals think that of Canadians, and that there's Canadians out there who would, happily just be locked down again, essentially, and take money from the government, knowing what it did to our economy in the wake of COVID. This is probably the most worrying element of it all. We had NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, just an absolute disgrace here. But he basically indicated that he might be willing to continue to prop up the Liberal government to pass this government work relief program. It's just unbelievable that this person holds a balance of power in Canada. Let's play this clip.
If Trump follows through on his plan with tariffs, would you keep the Liberals in power and allow for the passage of a work relief program before supporting a non-confidence motion?
I'll just start off by the fact that I've spoken with a lot of workers who are deeply worried about what the Trump tariffs might mean. They say, sometimes I lay awake at night saying, if that tariff goes through, do I lose my job? And what's going to happen to my kids? What's going to happen to my family? And we think about the analysis that's out there. If those Trump tariffs come in place, there are hundreds and thousands of Canadian jobs at risk. Think about what that means for those workers, hundreds of thousands of workers, for their families, for those communities. This could be devastating for our country. So we do need to have a plan in place to support those that are impacted, those businesses, those workers, most importantly. I have not had any conversations with other opposition leaders. I think we need to come together to have a discussion about what is the best way forward. I've not had any discussions with the government related to this. If there is any desire to move forward, the government should call us together, like we did during COVID, and discuss a plan that supports workers.
So he's willing to discuss a plan. He leaves the door wide open there for the idea of further propping up Justin Trudeau and his failed Liberal government. Tom, this is so infuriating because we finally heard from him in late December saying enough is enough. We will pull the plug on this government. It doesn't matter. We're done. And then here you have Jagmeet Singh just a month later out there saying, well, we have to have a meeting. We have to talk. I got an email from a Conservative Party operative that pointed out to me that Jagmeet Singh and the NDP voted in confidence for the Liberals 8 times since he supposedly ripped up his supply and confidence agreement in September. He had propped them up 11 times prior to the supply and confidence agreement. So a total of 286 times since the 21 election that Jagmeet Singh has propped up the Liberals. The idea that the Liberals have prorogued Parliament as well, like you should vote on something like this, but we can't vote on it because they prorogued Parliament for 7 weeks. So even in the Globe and Mail story itself, it said that this would require legislative approval, and the legislature won't resume until March 24th. So it's supposedly an emergency, yet at the same time, they have to prorogue the Parliament to have a leadership race, so we can't vote on this. Like, which one is it, right? And then you have NDP leader there just continuing to prop up this this government in shambles. What do you make of all this, Tom?
Yeah. There's one other point I should have made. We actually have a short-term emergency program in place. It's called employment insurance. All these workers that Mr. Singh is talking about, they're all covered by employment insurance. We have a very generous program. This will, it won't go on for years, but it will cover them. It will give them relief for months, several months, close to a year, depending on how long they've been working. So there's no need to panic over the condition of workers. I mean, nobody wants to see layoffs. I certainly don't, and it would be sad for those who are laid off. But it's not like they're thrown into a breadline immediately. We have this program in place. So employment insurance, gives us time to consider what the actual long-term response should be. So they're creating a false emergency as an excuse to shovel out a lot of money as an election tactic. And Jagmeet wants to get on the bandwagon here. That's what the NDP does, is give away money and wrap up nationalist concerns about the United States. So it's a perfect thing it's really quite clever when I think about it, to get the NDP back on side and to run a campaign on a promise to give away a lot of money and stop the big bad Americans. So as a piece of electioneering, it might have legs. We're going to have to see.
I can't understand what's motivating Jagmeet Singh after all of this. I mean, we had an NDP operative come on the show earlier this week to talk about the movement to get rid of Jagmeet Singh, or at least to make him force an election, because people in the party are so dissatisfied with this continuing propping up of a failed Liberal government. That the electioneering element would show something that would benefit the Liberals in an election, not the NDP. I still don't understand what's motivating him to continue to prop this up, other than perhaps he thinks that he's going to lose his job after the election. What do you think?
Well, yeah. I mean, the cynical thing is he wants to stay in Parliament long enough to get the pension. I doubt that's true, but anyway, the cynics say that. But yeah, you're right. Historically, the NDP does better at elections when the Liberals do worse and the Conservatives do better. The NDP also usually goes up under that set of circumstances. So if he props up the Liberals, he may well be undercutting himself. But he's done so many incomprehensible things to me over the years. I just don't know how shrewd a tactician he is, whether he really understands the dynamics here.
I just don't think he represents the people in his party anymore. It seems pretty clear to me. I'm surprised that they haven't axed him or found a way to have a leadership review, because I've heard from a lot of dissatisfied NDP voters. Interestingly, we had Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet come out with the right decision here, with the right line. He says that he would absolutely reject government relief program, and that he would not support this if there were a vote. So let's play that clip.
There's talk today of the government presenting a bailout package for people affected by tariffs, by American tariffs. Would you support the government in the House of Commons if they were to present such a thing?
I see no way I would support any astuce of the government. I suggest, I believe that the intention would be to create a context in which the government would get 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then they remain there longer than supposed, through hell in terms of parliamentary work. If the Liberals want things to become clear and want to help people, they should simply start the election sooner. Nothing prevents Mr. Carney or Mrs. Freeland, once this person is selected as the leader of the Liberals, to say on March 10th that we are going into election. We have improved the situation by 2 weeks, but I'm not getting into any tricks.
So, he almost said similar to what you said, that they're kind of manufacturing an emergency here to just prolong their ability to stay in office. It looks like, according to recent polling, Tom, Abacus had Mark Carney is basically going to run away with this thing, that Liberal voters see him much more favorably. He's very high in the polls, viewing Liberal supporters view him 64% favorability. So it looks like he will be the shoe-in. I don't know. I've been hearing a lot of sort of conspiratorial thinking about how they could cynically push back the election even further. And I would say conspiratorially, except for very credible mainstream voices have also been saying it, like Sean Speer had a piece in The Hub outlining this. Hamish Marshall was on my podcast last week, and he outlined this idea that we think that we should have an election in March or April or May, because that's what Jagmeet Singh said. The election deadline isn't until October, so you think October could be the latest. But that's not actually the case, because when you look at the Constitution Act, it basically just says that there's no maximum duration of legislative bodies, and that the Constitution lays out that the legislature, that the election should happen every 5 years. So I've been getting a chain letter forwarded to me a couple of times with somebody really just laying this all out, saying that that there could be an emergency, using emergency powers. The government could defer the next election until October 2026, because under both Section 50 of the Constitution Act of 1867 and Section 4 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms say that we could. So, you're a political scientist, Tom. Can you help us make sense of this? Is it possible? Do you see a scenario where the Liberals could do this? And is it legal if they were to try something like this?
Well, certainly legal. Yeah, no question that it's legal. There would be presumably some political cost to going back on your word. So they would be, excuse me, trying to take a balance there of plus and negative. Carney, yes, he's going to win the Liberal leadership race. This guy, he looks right out of central casting, as they say. When I see a picture of Carney on the front page, I almost want to vote for him until I think about what he represents. He just looks so much like a prime minister. And that's a huge advantage. I mean, look at what Justin Trudeau was able to do with the combination of good looks and a sort of pleasing personality. So I take Carney pretty seriously as an opponent, and his strength would probably increase if he could get more time. So I can certainly see why Liberal strategists might be thinking about that. And if that's the case, you could interpret this bailout policy, or the COVID, pandemic type of bailout, as the first step in that kind of tactic. They could say, okay, now we're helping Canadians. We have to stay in power to make sure that this help is delivered. We're going to go back on the idea of the quick election because conditions have changed so much. It's an emergency situation. It's the lines almost write themselves, actually. So, I can see it. I don't say it'll happen. I'm sort of out of touch with politicians. I spent years hanging out with politicians, so I sort of know how they think, but I'm out of touch now, so I don't know whether this will happen, but it strikes me as a plausible tactic that the liberal deep thinkers might be contemplating.
Incredibly cynical, bad for the country. But you're right. That's just the kind of thinking that fuels the Liberal Party. It's interesting because Mark Carney is not a member of Parliament. He has never been elected. He will be selected by the Liberals in a process that has been described as incredibly insecure. I mean, anyone can join the Liberal Party. I don't think you even have to be a citizen or a resident of Canada to join. And you don't have to pay anything, so there's no barrier. We've covered this on the show before, the tremendous instability that will come. Interestingly, Tom, yesterday, the government released its foreign interference inquiry. The report basically found that nobody acted in bad faith and concluded that rather than focusing in on the potential adversarial states that are funding senators and MPs, right? The interim report warned of MPs and senators who had wittingly collaborated with foreign government. Now, basically, the report's coming out saying nothing to see here. The only thing that the Commissioner Hogue found was calling for, and shouldn't be surprising at all, a government agency to monitor and regulate online misinformation and disinformation. It's like, that's the solution to everything for these people. Like, let's censor the online discussion even more, throwing these accusations of misinformation and disinformation, words that don't really mean anything anymore. I've lost complete faith, Tom, in these central institutions, in the elites that are running our institutions, because even an alleged outsider like this Commissioner Hogue comes to the same conclusion that Justin Trudeau would have come to, which is just it's all these like shadowy right-wing forces online, and we just need to censor and regulate even more. This is a serious issue that we have potential people collaborating with our enemies in our parliament, being funded by foreign adversaries representing us. I don't understand why they wouldn't name those individuals, Tom, and I don't understand how you could come to this conclusion by just saying nothing to see here.
Yeah. Well, again, this is an area where I don't have any firsthand knowledge. For what it's worth, I think that foreign governments, particularly China, have made an effort to influence nomination contests. That's easy to do where your rules are lax, as the Liberals' rules were. They've tightened it up a bit. I think now you have to be a resident of Canada to join the party. But, what does that mean? And how is that checked within a few weeks? In this case, it's such a quick selection process. No practical way to check it. Do we have a Manchurian candidate? I don't think so. I agree with the commissioner that so far, at least, this hasn't reached a level where it has produced a serious result for the overall conduct of Canadian politics. I think the Chinese clearly have tampered in a few nomination races. It's something that could be, could grow and should be monitored, and rules should be tightened up so that it can't grow. I think the Prime Minister came in with a rather benevolent attitude towards China, something he inherited from his father, that benevolent attitudes towards dictatorships, particularly China and Cuba. And I think that's much more important than Chinese efforts to put their thumb on the scales in choosing a few backbenchers, because backbenchers actually aren't that important in the overall scheme of things. So it's not an issue that had me losing sleep. Something that should be dealt with, but I don't see it as extremely important in the overall scheme of things. Setting up a new agency, I don't see the point of that. The main thing that the Chinese would do would be to influence nomination races by mobilizing people. And you're not going to control that with a new agency to monitor the internet. So the response doesn't seem to me or that part of the response anyway, doesn't seem to me to be called for, just as more government jobs. So it's a mixed bag. But again, I say it's not something that has had me particularly concerned. I think the opposition played it up. It's part of their job to try and embarrass the government, and the opposition played it up. But I'm not overly concerned about it. I'm much more concerned about a lot of other things, put it that way.
Fair enough. I do think that there's a level of irony that the people who are complaining loudest about Donald Trump and the 51st state comments and calling people like Danielle Smith or Jordan Peterson or Kevin O'Leary, calling them traitors for trying to have a relationship with our closest friend and ally, are the same kind of people who bury their head in the sand when it comes to China and Iran and other adversarial states actively mobilizing in Canada. I'll leave it at that. One more story. I want to talk to you, a political story, and then we can move on to the documentary, Tom. This is with Justin Trudeau. So there's a story coming out saying that Justin Trudeau is going to fill the remaining Senate vacancies before he steps down. So he said he's resigning, except for he's not actually resigning, and he's going to continue to even do the political stuff. So there are 10 vacancies in the Senate, and Justin Trudeau says that he will fill those, basically allowing someone to have an unelected job as a legislator until the age of 75. So quite a good gig here. True North is reporting that the Conservative Party of Canada is calling on Liberal leadership candidates to oppose Justin Trudeau's alleged plan to stack the Senate with Liberal partisans shortly before his resignation. Well, we decided to have some fun with that here at the Candice Malcolm Show. We've put together a new petition that viewers can head on over to my website, CandiceMalcolm.com, and they can help guess or predict who they think Trudeau's Senate appointments will be. So head on over to CandiceMalcolm.com for this. 10 influential, highly paid senators to friends of Justin Trudeau. So we came up with a list of some of the people that we might think, it could be Jagmeet Singh, could be Rosemary Barton of the CBC, maybe Gerald Butts, or any number of other journalists and insiders. So head on over, let us know who you think he will select. You can also add your own, because we don't, we didn't include everyone. We just included the sort of usual suspects that we think he might pick. So head on over to CandiceMalcolm.com and have some fun with that. Tom, what do you think about this decision to stack the Senate on his way out?
Well, yeah, it's naked partisan politics. He may not appoint partisan Liberals. I mean, he hasn't up to this point. He has appointed people whose thinking is in line with Liberal policy, but they don't have a history, most of them, as active partisan Liberals. So I don't know. Anyway, I would say if I can contribute to the list, I would put Jerry Butts and Katie Telford at the top. They've been loyal soldiers, and deserve a reward, but who's to say? My recollection is that Stephen Harper did not fill the Senate on the way out, and he absorbed a lot of criticism internally from Conservatives. I'm not sure how many went public with the criticism, but a lot of Conservatives were very disappointed that Stephen didn't fill up the Senate. So now the Conservatives want to stop Justin from filling up the Senate. Whether he does that or not, a new Conservative government will have, I think, a problem dealing with the Senate, and it's probably more difficult than dealing with a Senate which is composed of political hacks. When the Senate was obviously political appointments, everybody knew how the game is played, and when the Conservatives were in power, the Liberals would go along with legislation unless there had been a major decision to try and bring down the government. But now the Senate is largely composed of, sort of free-thinking people that aren't totally aligned with parties. I mean, there are a few political appointments left, but most of them see themselves as independent. So they might be much harder for a conservative government to deal with. I mean, I'd rather make a deal with a bunch of liberal hacks because we would all speak the same language rather than dealing with a bunch of free-thinking, progressive ideologues who don't feel any obligation to keep the wheels of government turning over. So,
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it just seems to me like such an arcane system, and this just shows another one of our institutions that's failed and broken that probably needs to be updated. Tom, I brought you on because I really wanted to talk to you about this documentary on residential schools. So viewers know that True North published Tom Flanagan's recent book, Grave Error, How the Media is Misleading Us on the Unmarked Graves in Residential Schools. Excellent book. I recommend everyone reading it. Caused quite the stir in the Canadian media landscape. I think that we had quite a few angry sort of criticisms of the book, and it really helped with our sales, particularly with a boycott that happened up in Quesnel, British Columbia, Tom. So the documentary, which was released, explores the legacy of residential schools in Canada. And on January 23rd, we learned that it was nominated for an Academy Award. Now, this film's not a drama, it's a documentary, which is supposed to be based on facts and truth. Unfortunately, much like the story of the unmarked graves, which many now believe has been exposed to be a hoax. Unfortunately, this documentary seems to run fast and loose with the facts. So first, let's just show the trailer for this documentary.
I felt dirty as an Indian all my life in residential school.
Look at that. It's all names.
When you're brought up in an institution like the Catholic Church, you have strict rules, and you went with their ethics.
I've been trying to find out what happened at St. Joseph's Mission.
Everything was so secretive.
My dad was born there. How did it happen?
It's not something that you want to open up, It just keeps on damaging.
For decades, there were reports of neglect and children dying or disappearing from this facility.
2 girls drowned. Priests were moved around.
Why are they dying? Did they think we'd be stupid all of our lives, the rest of our lives, and nobody would ever find out these things?
Beautifully produced film, very high quality, very compelling story, the way that it's narrated and the way that it looks. The film was reportedly sold to the National Geographic for 7 figures. So the people who produce this money made quite a bit of money. The people who produce this film have made quite a bit of money off of it, and it will be widely viewed. My concern, Tom, is that it's not based on actual facts. Can you tell us a little bit about this documentary and what you found?
Yeah, it's on a par with the Kamloops hoax, actually. I'll mention just a few things. There's we're going to have, maybe, I'm not sure whether it's up yet today, but we're going to have a detailed factual critique of the film on the website of the Indian Research Group, which is easily available online. So anybody who's interested can read all the details there. There's so many that I can't possibly bring them up in our conversation. But just a few things. In the way that it's produced, the film cuts back and forth between different people and places without identifying them. So many things that are said actually refer to events that took place on other reserves. It's supposed to be a focus on the sugarcane reserve, which is one near Williams Lake, British Columbia. But they bring in like the children drowning in the trailer. That didn't happen that's at another reserve far away in British Columbia. It has nothing to do with Williams Lake. Secondly, one of the main storylines is about the birth of Ed Noiscat, the father. The film, I don't know if producer is the right word, but the main voice is Julian Noiscat, his son. And they're pursuing the story of how Ed Noiscat was born. Well, there actually is no mystery to this. This was reported in the Williams Lake Press at the time that it happened, that Ed's mother, who at the time was 20 years old and was not a student at the residential school. She had been years earlier, but she wasn't now. She delivered the baby in her car while she was driving past, going, I think, from one reserve to another. And she may have thought the baby was stillborn. That's not clear. But in any case, she placed the baby in an incinerator where garbage was burned outside the mission. And then she drove away. And the baby was discovered a few hours later by the dairyman who supplied the school with milk. He heard a crying sound and he went and got the baby. And they, the people at the school saved the baby. And the mother was sentenced to jail for a year for whatever exactly the definition of the crime is. And then she got the baby back and raised it. Now, the documentary tries to make you believe that the baby was born at the mission, or excuse me, at the school. And in fact, Ed Noiscat says at one point, I was born on the second floor of the school. But there's absolutely no evidence for that. And there's a ton of evidence that the father of the baby was another status Indian who had a temporary split with the mother. And later they reconciled sort of off and on, but they did reconcile. They had other children. So there's actually no mystery here. And the main facts were reported in the Williams Lake Tribune, I think it's called. And in the documentary, they show the article to try and create an air of authenticity, but they don't give all the facts from the article. They don't tell you that the mother is 20 years old and not a student. And they don't tell you that there's no evidence that the father was of the child was a mission priest or anything like that. So there's all kinds of undocumented implications in the film. I mean, too many for me to deal with here, but it's constant throughout the film. The film also starts with bad information. There's some lines before they get into photography. They start by saying that after 1894, all Indian children were forced to attend residential schools, which is not true. They take it for granted that the Kamloops story about the 215 unmarked graves is true. They end the film by saying in print that we have determined a pattern of infanticide, when in fact they haven't done anything like that. The closest they come to it was the baby put in the incinerator who was saved, and that wasn't done by anybody at the school. That was done by a former student. But they imply at many cases in the film that the infanticide has taken place. For example, they show another main character in the film. They show him digging in the cemetery. I mean, this is an authorized cemetery. They show him digging in the cemetery, and he uncovers apparently the top of a casket. But we don't know who's in the casket. And then he makes the sign of the cross on the casket. I mean, it's all very moving, but there's no evidence that this is a child or had been at the school. He's just digging there. It could be anybody, because all kinds of people were buried in the cemetery. On and on and on. So, like, from beginning to end, this thing is false. And it's, I would like to say it's a disgrace that it's been nominated for the Oscars, and it is. But this movie has received so many awards that it's not just the failure of a single award ceremony. This is an indication of the zeitgeist, or the climate of opinion, that people think this is a great film. They don't make the slightest effort to do a fact check on what's in the film. So anyway, a couple of my friends who are involved with our ongoing research on Mark Graves and residential school so-called atrocities, a couple of my friends, Nina Green and Michelle Sterling, have dug into it in detail, and they have found all these dozens of factual, you can't call them errors. They are deliberate misrepresentations, like with the Ed Noisecat story of being put into the incinerator. The basic facts were in the Williams Lake story, which they had and they showed on the screen, but they suppressed some of the essential facts. They didn't mention them. I could go on and on. I'm getting wound up here. I could go on for a long time, but this is the basic thing I need to say. But I could supply many more examples.
Well, I look forward to the report that you have forthcoming, and we'll cover it on for True North. Make sure that Canadians see it. I mean, I don't mean to work you up even more, Tom, but to me, it's like it's Hollywood propaganda. It's not based on truth. It's based on a myth that they want to promote about Canada being a genocidal country and trying to eliminate any moral legitimacy that we have as a nation. It kind of goes back to the Jordan Peterson essay that I was talking about earlier. That does Canada even have the courage to exist? Like, do we even believe in ourselves as a country? And these kinds of stories come up, and I worry that young Canadians will view these kind of stories, take them as fact, believe the propaganda, believe the hoaxes. I know you and your colleagues have done tremendous work to expose these lies. But I mean, what else can be done to counter this sort of propagandistic narrative? I think that so many people sort of in the journalism world now, on the political conservative side, have come to see the truth about the story. Obviously, we feel quite badly for people who went to residential schools and had bad experiences. Obviously, the idea of children dying at a school is sad, regardless of the circumstance, particularly when it's a big federal government program. But the facts around the residential school, unmarked graves or mass grave stories, were just not true. And that's come forward. I think many people now believe that, and believe that maybe there's incentive for First Nations groups to continue pushing this myth, because it leads to a tremendous increase in government spending. You had a report over at the Fraser Institute, Tom, talking about how federal Indigenous spending has almost tripled since Justin Trudeau came into office, projected to be $32 billion that is going to these groups. Why don't you walk us through your report?
Yeah. Okay, the tripling of spending is based on the budgets of two departments, the Indigenous Services and what's the name of the other one? The one that deals with Indian governments. Anyway, we have two departments that focus on government affairs, and the allocations for those departments have gone from approximately $11 billion to approximately $32 billion in the time that the Liberals have been in power. Now, those are nominal dollars. I haven't adjusted that for changes in the cost of living. So maybe the real change is 2.5 times rather than 3 times, but it is still a huge change. In addition to that, we have the Liberal policy of rolling over on specific claims. Mainly specific claims are part of it, but the bigger part is the class actions based on claims of historic maltreatment, and starting with schools, but then expanding into other areas. And as soon as the Liberals came to power, they stopped contesting these claims, and they said, we'll negotiate rather than litigate. And that's what has built up the $76 billion recorded for contingent liabilities, which have alarmed the Parliamentary Budget Officer. Contingent liabilities are contingent in the sense that we don't know for sure what the amount will be, but we think there's going to be a big payout. And they don't go into the budget of the departments that deal with Native affairs. They're just in the general budget, and when it comes true, they're dispensed by well, whoever just writes checks from the General Revenue Fund. So it's a separate stream of spending. And that amount, when the Liberals came to power, was about 10 billion. Now it's up to, last time I looked, it was 76 billion. So there's huge, and it's going to grow because there are lots of class actions out there. And unless the policy of the government changes, we're going to ring up more of these liabilities, which take the form mainly of payouts to individuals, but which could be very large, tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars per person. So my article, talked about the budget of the departments, the contingent liabilities, mainly for specific claims. Mainly for class actions, but that also includes specific claims, which are claims that the government didn't administer the Indian Act properly, and so now large payments are due, and that has also exploded under the Liberals, up to billions of dollars a year. It used to be much smaller. I didn't try to do, there's another stream of spending that I didn't even try to do, and that is Indigenous programs in other departments. For example, fisheries and oceans is spending hundreds of millions of dollars a year to promote First Nations fishers, often by buying up licenses of other fishermen. Almost every department has a special program for Indigenous people, or for First Nations or Métis or whatever. It depends on the program. So I didn't attempt to total these. I don't know that anybody has, but this would be a multi-billion-dollar number as well, which is not in the budgets of the two departments which deal with Indigenous affairs as such. So there's been this huge spending explosion, or I called it an avalanche of money, in my paper for the Fraser Institute. And it's going to be a priority for any new government, whether it's Liberal or Conservative, which has any concern for balancing the budget, to try and deal with this. But it's going to be hard. The contingent liabilities are already committed in principle to payments. The budgetary explosion has created programs which may be frivolous, but there's always a constituency for every government program. There's always a group of people who benefit from it, and they will cry to high heaven if their programs are canceled. I don't know if anybody in Canada has the backbone of a Trump to just cancel a bunch of stuff all at once, which is one way of dealing with it.
Well, I think you'd have to, because I think even objectively, it's not like these programs have resulted in incredible increases in standard of living, or better communities and happier people. By most objective standards, these people are still suffering. Many are still living without basic necessities. So it's quite distressing to just see runaway spending, obviously benefiting a few at the top and not really changing the day-to-day life for so many others.
Well, the one program that has actually brought about a measurable benefit in the standard of living of First Nations people on reserve is the change to the child care benefit, which the Liberals enacted as soon as they came to power. And it's for higher income people, it doesn't matter so much, and some of it will be taxed back, maybe all of it, depending on how much what your income is. But for lower income people and with larger families, as tend to be the case on reserves, the increase in income is significant. And I'm in favor of children. I think we need more of them. So I'm not too concerned about an increase in pay. But what's interesting is that this program was not targeted for First Nations or Indigenous people. This was a program designed to benefit all Canadians below a certain income level. It benefits tens of millions of people. You could debate whether the program is needed or not, but it was not targeted. So the one thing that has measurably helped the standard of living on reserve was not a First Nations program at all. So my general conclusion is that the best way to help First Nations people is by general programs which encourage family formation, which encourage paid work, and so on, rather than trying to target things narrowly, particularly based on the assumption that they were terribly mistreated in the past. Something I should have said about sugarcane, if I can just go back there for a second, it's related. All these people talk about how they were harmed in residential school and how they, they deserve compensation for it. But they all got compensation already. All these people who attended residential school would have participated in the settlement, which was reached, class action settlement, finally inked in 2008. And the payments were tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars, depending upon alleged grievances, mistreatment in the schools. I mean, all these people would have had their compensation already. But here they are again, talking about the need for another round of compensation. They've had their apologies. They've had a cascade of new programs. Like everything that government could conceivably do has been done. But they are creating bogus stories about infanticide and throwing babies in the incinerator and so on, which are without evidence. But I'm not saying the motive is to get more money, but I can't get inside people's minds. But they certainly are asking for more compensation in the movie. And again, this is another falsehood in the movie, that when they ask for compensation, there's no voice saying, well, yeah, but they already got $200,000 a piece or $50,000, depending on the case. Anyway, so the spending is a bit related to the sugarcane. So all these atrocity stories like Kamloops and sugarcane, they feed a mentality of deservingness. Like we need more compensation. We need government to do more things for us. So they are in fact related psychologically.
Well, absolutely. We heard a lot of that in the wake of the unmarked grave story. And I think that's sort of, again, one of the things that the Liberals do best is they always have a solution to borrow more and spend more to try to fix every problem. Well, Tom Flanagan, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for setting the record straight, bringing this information to the public. We'll certainly be reporting on your next report there. So thanks for your time and thanks for all the hard work you do.
Okay, and I hope you spend your child care benefit wisely.
Well, I'm completely on board with we need more children. My husband and I are doing our best with our 4 little ones. But okay, thanks for your time, Tom. And to the audience, thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Candice Malcolm. This is the Candice Malcolm Show. We'll be back again tomorrow with all the news. Thank you and God bless.